Friends, the book being released today is A Tale of Two Cities by Sri M.K. Sudarshan. The two cities referred to are Srirangam and Kanchipuram, spiritual homes of the Tenkalai and the Vadakalai sects, respectively. The book is an outline of the 1,000-year history of the Sri Vaishnavas of Tamil Nadu. The book sees Vaishnava history not just in terms of great acharyas or great temples, but in the wider context of political movements and societal changes. Dr. Aravindan Neelakandan says in his foreword to the book that it is a must-read for every Hindu, not just every Vaishnavite. A few words about Mr. Sudarshan. A chartered accountant, he worked for 11 years with some top corporates in India. In 1993, he went abroad. During the next 24 years, he served several conglomerates in the Middle East, Bahrain, Kuwait, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, as group controller, finance director, or CFO. After return to Chennai in 2016, he has pursued his lifelong interests in Indian philosophy, history, English literature, and Carnatic music. He travels, reads, writes, reflects, and blogs. His 2016 book, Unusual Essays of an Unknown Sri Vaishnava, was a personal tribute to the memory of Sri Ramanujacharya on the occasion of his 1000th anniversary. Launched at Tax Center under the auspices of the South India Heritage Program, the book won critical acclaim and was later exhibited at several international book fairs. Mr. Sudarshan is the managing trustee of a very active foundation that honors the memory of his mother, Kalaimamani Dr. Mani Krishna Swami. Friends, I now invite Mr. N. Gopalaswamy, former Chief Election Commissioner, to release the book. I request Dr. S. Padmanabhacharya of the Ahobila Mutt to receive the first copy of the book. May I now request Mr. M.K. Sudarshan to address the gathering.
Vina Venkatesham Nanato Nanatas Sada Venkatesham Smarami Smarami Hare Venkatesha Prasida Prasida Priyam Venkatesha Prayacha Prayacha Sri Lakshmi Narasimha Parabrahmane Namaha Srimate Ramanujaya Namaha Sri Nigamanta Mahadeshikaya Namaha Srimate Sri Vanchalagopa Sri Ranganatha Yadindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My warm greetings to all of you. Thank you for taking so much time on a Sunday evening and braving the rains to come here and be part of this event. I also see a lot of my family members here, a lot of my relatives and friends from my college days. Thank you so much. You don't know how much it means to me. My presentation now will take about 45 minutes, and this is what I'm going to be talking about. As a general disclaimer, I'm going to first talk about what this book is not. The title of this book is A Tale of Two Cities. For those of you who are, I know, English literature buffs, sorry to disappoint you. This has nothing to do with Charles Dickens. This is not about London or France in the 19th century during the French Revolution. This is about Kanchipuram and Sri Rangam. The subtitle of the book is The Decline and Fall of the Ubhaya Vedantins. At first glance, this title may sound a little grim and foreboding, just like Edward Gibbon's title for his masterpiece called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. But let me hasten to assure you that my book is not all gloom and doom. It actually has a happy ending if you read it. The second subtitle of the book reads An Outline of the History of Sri Vaishnavas of Tamil Nadu, which was never written. Some of you might wonder, why such a long and verbose subtitle? And some of you might even think that it sounds a tad self-conceited and arrogant. It sounds like a tall claim. In a little while, I'll explain to you why I chose this subtitle and why I'm not conceited and I'm not arrogant. This book also has nothing to do whatsoever with Sri Vaishnava philosophy, theology, literature, scripture, or practices of Sampradaya. Also, this book is about 500 pages, but it is not a history textbook, and certainly not in the sense in which a history professor in a university might have written it. To use a metaphor, this book is just an outline of history drawn on a giant IMAX screen canvas. Although not a history textbook, it is still my fond hope that this book will gain acceptance in the academic world and perhaps even be prescribed as essential reading for students of Sri Vaishnavism or students of Tamil history in universities, such as the Madras University, the Shastra University, Sri Venkateshwara University, or maybe even the Banaras Hindu University. That's my fond hope. This book is also not a work of original research. What I have done is I have just gone out into the public domain, libraries, research papers published, dissertations, and conversations with scholars, like whom we have sitting here right before us, Dr. Padmanabhacharya, and others. And I have just gathered all the information, strung them together, and connected the dots. So this is not a book of original research. When you buy this book, on the back cover, you will see a blurb. It's a tantalizing blurb. But please don't get misled by it. You might think that this is just another one of those books that talks about the Tengalai Vadagalai turf war. But it is much more than that. I'll explain that to you a little later. However, this book is about a historical narrative that is indeed woven around the two cities of Kanchipuram and Srirangam. Because everything that happened in the history of Sri Vaishnavas really happened in the landscape between these two cities for 1,000 and more years, since the time of Ramanuja. Now that I have told you what this book is not, let me tell you a little bit about what this book is really about. But to tell you about that, I have to digress a bit and tell you a little about my personal journey in the past 5 years. As Sri Madhu informed you, in the year 2017, it was the 1000th birth anniversary of Sri Ramanujacharya. And I wanted to pay my tribute to his memory personally. So what I did was, I published a book of English essays as a tribute to him. And each English essay was my personal appreciation of splendid gems that is found in the religious history of Sri Vaishnavism. It was drawn from the Vedas, the Vedanta, Itihasas, Puranas, the Divya Prabandhams, and the other Sanskrit and Tamil works found in the rich Sri Vaishnava literature. That book had about 75 chapters. And in June 2017, I think, thanks to Sri R.T. Chari, that book was launched, Unusual Essays of an Unknown Sri Vaishnava, from this very stage. Not only was the book launched, but thanks to Sri R.T. Chari, my career, second career in life as a writer, was also launched. Thank you, sir. Now, that experience of having published my first book triggered inside me an obsessive fascination with a strange subject called Sri Vaishnava identity. In the years thereafter, I started observing and interacting with young modern-day Sri Vaishnavas within my own extended family here in India, as well as in the Sri Vaishnava diaspora in America, Europe, Australia, and elsewhere. And the more I observed about Sri Vaishnava life, the deeper and more intense became my obsession, my fascination with this subject. In November 2018, Sri R.T. Chari again invited me to this stage to deliver a talk which was entitled A Few Facets of the Sri Vaishnava Identity. And that presentation, some of you might have attended it, that presentation raised some fundamental questions about Sri Vaishnava identity. Questions such as, who is a Sri Vaishnava? What defines the modern Sri Vaishnava identity? Is it the mark of the Tirumand and Sri Churnam? Is it the holy rites of the Samashrayanam? Is it defined only by allegiance to a particular sect, Tengalai or Vadagalai? Or allegiance to a matam or an ashram? Or is a Sri Vaishnava to be identified by the native roots to which he belongs, some village in and around any of those 100-odd Divya Desams which are known as Sri Vaishnava Divya Desams? Now, in the past 5 years as a writer, I began seriously seeking answers for such questions. And after a few years of searching for such answers for such questions, I finally came to my own conclusion. The modern identity of this tiny Tamil community can be objectively defined only in terms of one outstanding characteristic. And what is that? It is adherence to ideals which Sri Ramanuja himself pursued in his lifetime. And those ideals are collectively and commonly known today as Sri Ramanuja Siddhantam or Sri Ramanuja Sampradaya. Now, identification with this Sampradaya is, in my opinion, at two different levels. At one level, it involves adherence to all its prescribed external symbolisms and sacraments, such as Urdhvapundram, Panchasamskaram, Bharanyasam, Anushtanams, which is basically disciplines, and other yamams and niyamams, which are ethical do's and don'ts in life. At yet another level, which is, in my opinion, a slightly higher level, is the identity which I call the identity of the Ubhaya Vedantins. The difference in the two levels of identity is explained at length in my book in chapter 3, read with chapter 48. These two chapters delve deeply into what we all consciously are aware of. We know that there is something called a personal identity. Now, let me just quickly give you a brief summary of these two levels of identity and these two chapters which I have just referred to. Now, personal or individual identity is a matter of complex psychology. It is also problematic, philosophically speaking. There is an old Greek story from the Greek mythology that helps us to understand this complex problem. It is called the ship of Theseus. That is the ship of Theseus. And there's a story behind it. It's a Greek fable. Let me just tell you that in a very short time. In ancient Greece, there was a legendary king named Theseus, who supposedly founded the city of Athens. Since he fought and won many naval battles, the people of Athens dedicated a memorial in his honor by preserving the ship and keeping it in the public view at the port. This ship of Theseus stayed there for hundreds of years. As time went on, some of the wooden planks in the ship started rotting. To keep the ship nice and complete, the rotting planks were removed from time to time and replaced with planks made of the same material. Now, let's say the ship has about 100 planks. As time went on, 49 were rotten and they had to be replaced. As another 100 years went on, another 75 got rotten, it had to be replaced. Now, the key philosophical question about identity is this. If you replace even one plank of this ship, is it still the same ship of Theseus? And if you change 49 of those planks, is it still the same ship of Theseus? If you change 99, is it still the same ship of Theseus? Can you say it is the same ship? Now, the same question which you apply to the ship of Theseus, you can also apply to the ship of Sampradaya, which is called Ramanuja Sampradaya. If you were to remove 2 or 3 essential features of the Ramanuja Sampradaya, or remove half a dozen distinctive features of the Ramanuja Sampradaya, as time goes on, will it still be the same ship of Ramanuja Sampradaya in the same way as you want to say that it is the same ship of Theseus? So this is a question, it's a deeply philosophical question. Now, if the planks are changed gradually, the question comes up, how gradual must the change be so that the original status of or the identity of the ship does not change? how gradual must the change be? The other question is, what happens if the old wooden planks are switched with modern plastic planks? And if the same thing happens to Ramanuja Sampradaya, what do you do? Another question, does it matter who is making those changes to the ship? That is, whether one group of workers or another group of workers changes the planks. In the case of Ramanuja's legacy ship of Sampradaya, would it matter or not who makes the changes? The Tengalais of Srirangam or the Vadagalais of Kanchipuram? So, ladies and gentlemen, just think about this. If the ship is to be preserved for hundreds of years, we can be sure that many different people are definitely going to be making the changes. And what if they make so many changes to the boat that it can no longer float out to sea? Can we still call it the ship of Theseus then? Or the ship of Ramanuja's Sampradaya? If it cannot perform the same function as the original one did. So if you think about this ship of Theseus and use it as a metaphor to think about Sampradaya of Ramanuja, you will all realize that it is a deeply philosophical problem. Identity is always a philosophical problem. And the identity of the modern Ubhaya Vedantin is no exception. Now, as a writer, I have thought deeply about this problem. But I tried to simplify it. I tried to simplify the study of the complex problem. And I did it by recognizing that the idea of identity, the idea of personal identity, has three main dimensions. The three main dimensions of personal identity is literature, philosophy, and history. Please keep this in mind. The first dimension of Sri Vaishnava identity is the vast body of rich and ancient religious literature found in Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, in Sanskrit and Tamil. My first published book, The Unusual Essays of an Unknown Sri Vaishnava, was really about this first dimension only. The second dimension of identity is philosophy. Now, if you are a Sri Vaishnava of the modern day and you have no proper and firm grounding in Ramanuja's Visishtadvaita Siddhantam, then identification with this Sampradayam can become very problematic and your identity can be very anemic. I came to this firm conclusion in the year 2022 while writing my second book, which I published in the same year. The second book was titled The Nondescript God, Abstraction or Paragon. In writing this book, I was mentored by none else than our chief guest here on stage, respected Dr. S. Padmanabhacharya. Please give him a hand. This book is very slim. It's only 150 pages. It is a mini treatise, just one of the many principles and doctrines of Visishtadvaita philosophy. But the main purpose of the book was to drive home only one point. Nothing can be stronger than good basic grounding in philosophy to serve as the sheet anchor of a Sri Vaishnava's sense of personal identity. Without this anchor, the ship of one's own Vaishnava identity will simply be adrift in the sea of life, being tossed about aimlessly. The third dimension of the modern Sri Vaishnava identity is history. This new book, which has just been released today, A Tale of Two Cities, ladies and gentlemen, is devoted entirely to an in-depth exploration of the history of Sri Vaishnava community. Now, I must tell you why I wrote this book of the history of the Sri Vaishnavas. My main reason for writing this book can be summed up in just one line borrowed from the well-known Black American writer, Toni Morrison. Some of you may have read her books. She's a wonderful novelist. Now, she said, if there is a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. Now, Sri Vaishnavas have a glorious past. They were renowned for deep religiosity, scholarship in philosophy and theology, of being mystics and poets and outstanding literators in Sanskrit and Tamil. They were also builders of great cultural institutions, traditions, and temples. Given the tiny size of their population, Sri Vaishnavas by nature were very self-effacing. Outside of South India, their long history, even today, is relatively unknown to historians or scholars in universities. Whatever historiography on Sri Vaishnavas is available today, it cannot be separated, extricated, or clearly distinguished from the 1,000-year history of their acharyas or the Acharya Parampara, nor from the Sthala Puranas of their Divya Desam temples. If Sthala Puranas and hagiography of the acharyas and saints of Sri Vaishnava are both removed, then I can tell you, from my bit of research done, there is not much of modern historiography about Sri Vaishnavas left. There is nothing like a plain, straightforward historical account of the Sri Vaishnavas just as a people, as a community. So, since I didn't find any book which I wanted to read about the history of the Sri Vaishnavas, I took Toni Morrison's advice. I decided to write a book myself that I always wanted to read, but found it had never been written. A Tale of Two Cities is thus a book which tries to view the history of the Sri Vaishnavas differently. It does not look at Sri Vaishnava history through the lens of the aggregated narratives of hagiography and legendary temple Sthala Puranas. Rather, my book aims to relate or connect those narratives with much larger epochal developments and undercurrents of Indian history, political movements, and societal changes which were happening in the background all the time. So this book spans a history between 11th century CE and the year 2023 today. So ladies and gentlemen, it is only in that precise sense that I can claim that my book is an outline of the history of Sri Vaishnavas that was never written. And none of you should therefore hold me guilty of making tall claims or being self-conceited or arrogant. Let me quickly run through the major themes of this book. Now, these are some of the major themes which you will find in the book. The Tale of Two Cities is a historical narrative about loss of religious legacy, about debility of cultural identity. It is about the decline of economic wealth arising from political alienation and social upheavals. It is also a tale of common human failings. The book talks about ambition, greed, deceit, envy, malice, and betrayal. In 10 chapters, from chapter 4 through chapter 14, you will get to read about the post-Ramanuja era of Ubhaya Vedantins, their lives, lifestyles, and livelihoods. In chapters 15 through chapter 21, you will find accounts about the halcyon era that the Sri Vaishnavas enjoyed, both in Sri Rangam and Kanchipuram and everywhere between, during the rule of the Vijayanagar dynasty in the 15th, 16th century CE, and how generations of the Tatachari and Uttamanambi families at Kanchi and Sri Rangam built their great spiritual and cultural empires. In chapter 22 is you will read about the Islamic depredations of the Khilji, Tughlaq, Bahmani, and Mughal dynasties upon Sri Vaishnava temple ecosystem, and how they stripped it of temple commonwealth, traumatized the community, and degraded its cultural and political preeminence that they had held and enjoyed under the Vijayanagar, Pandya, Nayak, and the Wadayar rules. In chapter 24 through chapter 28 is a blow-by-blow account of the devastating impact that the very first infiltrations of Christian evangelism and missionary movements across India in the late 18th century had upon the Sri Vaishnava community, and how the slow destruction and decay of their identity began with the death of their mother tongue, Sanskrit. In chapter 27, the book deals with the period when the British East India Company commandeered many of the largest Sri Vaishnava temples, notably the Tirumala temple at Tirupati, and systematically impoverished and corrupted them. Chapters 30 through 34 describe how under the British Crown rule, the divide and rule policies of the colonial British government created mass migration, mass rapid urbanization, and mass secularization of several successive generations of Sri Vaishnavas all across Tamil Nadu, and how that social churning rudely uprooted us, the Sri Vaishnava community, millions of families from native roots, and alienated them from their cultural vocations. Chapter 35 through 37 deals with the severe culture shocks the Sri Vaishnava community experienced during the pre-independence period in the first few decades of the 20th century, after the rise of the Dravidian anti-Brahmin movement and the enactment of many legislations which enabled elected governments to interfere and even take over Sri Vaishnava temples. Through chapters 38 through 40, described in this chapter, is described the post-independence culture war that we all know rages even today. It rages even yesterday. Between Sanskrit versus Tamil, Dravidian versus Aryan, and Brahmin versus anti-Brahmin. The narrow sectarian infighting between Tengalai and Vadagalai is very much part of the same culture war. It has really much more to do with the larger socio-political and ethnological caste dynamics in Tamil Nadu than anything to do with Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. In chapters 41 through 44, I have explained how the judicial system of India, a lot of lawyers here, you might be a little offended, how the judicial system of India has impacted the identity of the Sri Vaishnava community. The Constitution of India and judicial pronouncements of various courts across the country have not always been very protective of the interests of the Hindu religion, its temple ecosystem, and institutions. At least 4 major landmark judicial verdicts have profoundly disturbed, if not disrupted, the way control and administration of temples in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh were regulated by tradition in the past. The 4 cases are the Shirur Mutt case, the Tirumala Temple Archaka case, the Chidambaram Sabhanayagam case, and the Sabarimala Temple case. Please read those judgments and you will know how it impacts all of us. In chapter 45, a brief account is given of how Tengale and Vadegale have gone on to salami slice themselves, and that is how they caused their own splintering into many smaller autonomous Sampradaya units, each styling itself as a separate matam, ashram, peetam, or samasthanam. Chapters 46 and 47 describe how under the onslaught of anti-Brahmin Dravidian ideological propaganda and culture war, the identity of Sri Vaishnavas got chipped away, if not wholly stripped away. 4 such incidents are briefly narrated in my book, involving 4 well-known celebrities. The late Chief Minister M. Karunanidhi, the Tamil cinema lyricist Vairamuthu, the Sri Vaishnava Carnatic musician T.M.Krishna, and present Chief Minister Sri M.K. Stalin. Chapters 49 to 54 describes how a few bold and well-meaning Sri Vaishnava scholars and observers came out in public to deeply introspect about the present decline and stature and relevance of the Sri Vaishnava community. The Sri Vaishnava community leadership, unfortunately, dismissed them as mere mavericks and publicity seekers. Chapter 55 contains my own personal views on how to salvage, if not save, the broken Sri Vaishnava identity. My views are radical, they are quite provocative. They can potentially stir up a bit of controversy. Therefore, I will not divulge them here today. You must buy the book and read it all for yourself. And after reading this chapter, whether you want to throw bouquets at me or throw brickbats at me is really up to you. But I will accept both gracefully. The final 2 chapters, 56 and 57, and the epilogue retells 2 happy and inspiring stories. They will surely go into modern Sri Vaishnava history if and when a future historian writes it. One story is about the Sri Vaishnava Acharya from near Kanchipuram. At the age of 90, built a world-famous temple tower, the colossal Rajagopuram of Sri Rangam temple. And then there is also the story of how the present Jier of Ahobila Mutt won his case in the Supreme Court of India to wrest back effective control of the Ahobilam Sri Narasimha Swami temple, Devasthanam, from the clutches of the government of Andhra Pradesh. Now that I've finished giving you an overview of the major themes in the book, the question which is foremost in your mind is, why should I buy this book, this 500 big tome? Why should I buy this book and read it? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is given by Sri Aravindan Neelakandan. Most of you have read him, most of you know about him. He's a scholar, historian, and journalist. He's a contributing editor of the Swarajya magazine, and he's the co-author of the best-selling book of Rajiv Malhotra, Breaking India. He has written a foreword to my book, and this is what he says. On the whole, this book is a must-read for every Hindu, whether he or she is a Sri Vaishnava or not. This book is not just for Sri Vaishnavas, for God's sake. Because this is part of our history. And the author has, with genuine love for all Hindus, made this the story with valuable lessons for our future as well. I rest my case. I must now place on record my sincere gratitude to Sri Artichari. He not only launched my book, you launched my second career as a writer, sir. I'm also deeply grateful to Sri N. Gopal Swami, former Chief Election Commissioner of India, and Dr. S. Padmanabhacharya, our honored guests today. They so readily accepted to grace this occasion. I'm just as eager as all of you to hear their speech. I wish to express my sincere appreciation of the great assistance my wife, Srimati Divya Sudarshan, so diligently gave me in proofing the manuscript. There are still a few mistakes, but those are printer's devils, not my wife's mistake, before it went into print. I also thank my publishers, Westwood Publishing, Atlanta, USA. Outside in the foyer, ladies and gentlemen, about 25 copies of my new book are available, and also another book. And they are available for sale on a first-come, first basis. This book is readily available on Amazon, on all Amazon platforms, including Amazon India. You can book your orders for hardcover, paperback, or Kindle ebook edition, as per your convenience. A book flyer will also be distributed on your way out. You will find all my contact details and more information on easy ways to order the book. If any of you wish to have a transcript of my talk here given this evening, please send me an email and you will get it. Thank you all. Sarva Mangalani Bhavantu.
Thanks. That was a talk very well structured and delivered with remarkable clarity and lucidity. May I now request Mr. N. Gopalaswamy to address the gathering. First, a few words about him. A distinguished IAS officer, he held several top posts in Gujarat and the center, including that of Union Home Secretary. He served as Chief Election Commissioner from 2004 to 2009. He was later chairman of Kalakshetra for 5 years from 2014. He was awarded the Padma Bhushan in 2015. This is a very brief bio, one can say a lot about him. Over to Mr. Gopalaswamy.
Srimate Ramanujaya Namaha. Ulaham Yavayam Tamulavaakaram Nileberuthalam Ninkalam Ningala Alehila Valeatriyan Avardalevar and our Kesharan Nangale. After a comprehensive view of the entire book, what I am going to say may or may not really add much value to your information about the book, but say I must about this book that there is much which I wasn't aware that I found in this book, especially on the historical perspective which Mr. Sudarshan has very beautifully brought out. He did mention that the Vaishnavite community is small and they are self-effacing. But Mr. Padmanabhan will have a different view altogether and he will quote something which I am not wanting to say now. Coming to this, there is this, when I keep thinking about this schism, as Mr. Sudarshan at somewhere mentions, I was aware of 18 differences which are being talked about. And when I went through all these 18, I was quite disappointed. At least 15 of them didn't make any big difference. I mean, didn't really mean anything at all. I mean, so very insignificant. 3 seemed to be somewhat significant, but it seemed to me that they were more, polemical kind of writing rather than real issues. But we must understand that in those days, 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, people had a lot of time. And polemics is part of their life. So what happens is that every little issue is blown up because you have to show your intellectual prowess, powers to argue, and the famous statement of argumentative Indian, powers to argue and defeat the enemy. So, while the underpinning or the way it was described, the way it was projected was deep philosophical differences in approaching some aspects of Ramanuja's philosophy, in actual fact, you realize that it is not so. I wasn't aware until I read Mr. Sudarshan's book, that this 18 differences actually came about somewhere around 19th century only. It wasn't even before. And somewhere I did afterwards read that Vedanta Deshika and Pillai when they had held different opinions on a particular issue, Vedanta Deshika describes it as not a different religion, or not a different matam, abhipraya betam, not mata betam. That's what he describes it as. So it's only way of looking at things were different, but not a whole lot of philosophically different viewpoint. But over a period of time, it has been blown up to such an extent that we fight a case as to whether the poor elephant should have this signature or the other. And the poor elephant left to itself might want nothing at all. And anybody who talks today of the differences between the two sects will actually be talking only about, because that is what is known outside. The differences in physical appearances and wearing the namam, etc., etc. And not what any of those 18 are. I don't know, not even that 18 will be. But what is behind that 18 is what Sudarshan has brought out. I had an inkling, somehow, of course, thanks to Mr. Sudarshan, he used to write, I used to read his blogs very avidly on this issue. He has written somewhat 40 or 45 essays. The more I read them, the more I got convinced that what I had in my mind, that it is a property dispute between two brothers, is very much confirmed by what he wrote. It's actually a property dispute as to who will hold the property and who will hold the maximum number of properties. And an idle mind is a devil's workshop, and many idle minds were found, and the result is that you go to the court of law and be told by them saying that you are damn stupid fellows. Somebody who doesn't know the Sampradaya, somebody who doesn't know, may not even care for your Hinduism or for your Vaishnavism, will be telling you, saying that you are damn stupid. I have seen, after going to Gujarat and being there for about 25 years, I have seen many places, the same family will have, there is a Vaishnava family and a non-Vaishnava family. They will intermarry very easily. The thing is that the bride who comes to a Vaishnava family will become a Vaishnava, and the bride who goes to the Saivite family will become a Saivite. Much like what the classical Chaturvarna theory in action in Bali. In Bali, if you are a priest, you are a Brahmin. The day you decide to leave that priesthood and join the army, you are a Kshatriya. The day you go and start doing a business, you are a Vaishya. The day you do what many of us did, being government servants, you are a Shudra. That's about all. As simple as that. But here, of course, it got stratified, and then thereafter, of course, though there is a mention very, very much in the Bhagavad Gita that Janme Shudra. Everybody is Shudra at the time. And then you, because of your karma, you go up or go or stay there. So this entire history which he has traced, this is wonderful reading, but sad reading. I can understand his anger, his anguish when he put down all this, and I don't know whether he will permit me to read some of his. So it is prohibited or not prohibited? So can I read some of your one or two? I'll read out of your 11 commandments. Okay. And I have a 12th commandment, which I will also share with you. Chapter 55, he summarizes and then says that the following are my take or my commandments. 11 commandments is given. I will not read all 11. I'll just read one or two. rewriting and updating and releasing a new authentic biography of Sri Ramanujacharya, shorn of all hagiography, apocrypha, legends, panegyric, and unverifiable facts of history. Erasing the symbols of two sects, Y and U. That's why I never wear either U or Y. You would have noticed it. I am following what he has been saying. There are many others. Altogether about 11. So I will add a 12th. If they don't accept what you say, the 11, banish all of them. That one, it's an eye-opener for me. I really commend this book in the sense that, it gives you in brief, not in brief, in 500 pages, it gives you the entire history, but the bottom line is, if you are going to fight, there will be enough number of people who will be fishing in the troubled waters. And the earlier that we think that we should no longer fight, the better, but I don't know where the wisdom will come from. Unfortunately, he also mentioned about how we got divided into various matams and acharyas and so on and so forth. Now, will all of them get together? Looks impossible. Will there be a overwhelming personality who will bring them together and talk about reconciliation or how no more this fight? I don't know. If there is any person, unfortunately, again I must mention that most of the matams, and with due apologies to Padmanabhacharya, most of the matams and the gurus, unfortunately, are no longer moving amongst masses. I recall my Gujarat days, up to 1967, the field officers, especially the sub-collectors, were never given a vehicle. They will travel in public transport to various talukas and to the villages and so on and so forth. In fact, many villages at that time were not connected, therefore you will travel in a bullock cart. 66, 67 and 68 were drought years in Gujarat, therefore many jeeps were bought for inspection of the drought relief works and so on and so forth. And at the end of the good rains in 68, government was wanting to take a decision about giving vehicles, and they were wanting to decide to give it to the sub-collectors and the assistant collectors. Those who came from the ranks used to be called assistant collectors. Those who were directly recruited used to be called, in Tamil Nadu they are called sub-collectors and assistant collectors, but in Gujarat they used to be called assistant collectors or sub-divisional officers. Our Secretary Revenue Department opposed it tooth and nail for the simple reason. He said, look, the moment you give a vehicle, all of them will go with vehicle to the village and come back and never stay there. In fact, in Gujarat, the orders were that as an assistant collector, you will spend 10 days outside your headquarters, out of which 7 nights you will have to spend outside. So there are many days in which I have stayed in villages and gone in the morning with a lota. You understand that, okay? But he opposed it. He was overruled in vehicle, and he was absolutely dead right. Many officers used to do a night halt by going to a village, staying up to 1 minute past 12 and come back. So something similar has happened here, in the sense that most of the Matatipatis are now having a vehicle, they travel by. So, and they are stay put in their headquarters, either here or in Sri Rangam or somewhere else. Gone are the days when they used to do Padayatra. You need not do Padayatra, but at least you can go from village to village using a vehicle. Those traditions have been lost. Because of this, the touch with the masses has also been lost. Last, when huge Padayatra was done, was, I think, Thirukudananavan illa. So, yaar Padayatra panni ponadu? Thirukudananavan. So that tradition has been lost, therefore you have lost touch with people, and there is one very important loss out of that. many Vaishnavites who are not Brahmins, many Vaishnavite families are no longer Vaishnavite families. I remember, you heard of the name of Jagadrakshakam. He can quote all 4,000 at a moment's notice. Because he said, my father used to wake me up at 4 o'clock, me and my brother. If we don't get up, we'll get a slap. And he used to teach us Nalaya Diva Prabandham. And that set of people are no longer being approached or no longer being made, the presence of the acharyas is not being made available to them. And very few. Which again makes the community very, very smaller and totally inward looking. So anyway, these are all Kalathin Kolam Endrum Solalam. Okay. So while concluding, apart from saying that his book is a wonderful addition to the history of Sri Vaishnavas, I only wish somebody sits down and take notice of all the 11, if not the 12th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalaswamy, for a very interesting and revealing assessment. May I now request Dr. Padmanabhacharya to address the gathering. He serves the Ahobilamat and holds a position next only to that of the Pontiff. Earlier, he served as Professor and Head, Department of Sanskrit University, Madras. He has 33 years of teaching experience. He is the author of 7 books and has taken part in nearly 50 national and international conferences. He is the Chairman Board of Studies of Madurai Kamaraj University, and he is connected with several other universities. Over to Dr. Padmanabh.
Sarvopi yam samashritya sakalam bhadramashnuте Shriya cha bhadryajushto yastham bhadram namamyaham. Sri Ranganatha Shatakopaitindra Drashtam Lakshmi Nrisimha Shatajit Karunaika Patram Sri Rangavira Raghurat Shatakopa Hridyam Vedanta Deshika Etindra Maham Prapadye. Namasadase. Ladies and gentlemen, considering the elite group here, I feel I am an odd man in this. However, at the command of Mr. Sudarshan, I ventured to take part in today's function. Well, Vaishnavism is a general term, and Vaishnavism has various forms throughout India. You take up Gujarat or Bengal or Assam or anywhere. The Vaishnavite tradition has many forms, and particularly in South India we call it a Sri Vaishnavism. It's called the Sri Sampradaya, wherein we give importance to Sri or Lakshmi, and the supreme reality or Godhead is Sriman Narayana. Whereas if you go to other forms, they won't call it a Sriman Narayana or Vasudeva or Narayana, and some other name is given. So this Sri Vaishnavism is prevalent in this part of this country. And as the book says, the two cities, Srirangam and Kanchipuram, is the center of activity of this Sri Vaishnavite tradition. With regard to the philosophical concept, there is no difference between the two traditions. I quote Sri Vedanta Deshika in his Sampradaya text, Sampradaya Parishuddhi. He emphatically states that, I say, quote, Sri Bhashyakararuடைய Shishya Sampradayangalile Yojana Bedame Andri Artha Virodham Illai. So this is a very, very important passage as far as any Sri Vaishnavite is concerned. He clearly says that with regard to the concept, there is no difference. But the difference lies only in the interpretation. How do you interpret that concept? That's where exactly the differences came out. I can just quote one or two instances for that. The Supreme God is the abode of innumerable auspicious qualities, and the Sri Vaishnavite tradition accepts many qualities, of which two are important, say the Vatsalya and Karunya. These two differences. Of course, Sri Gopal Swami sir spoke about the 18 differences. I will come to that later, if time permits. I do not know what's the time allotted to me. See, for instance, you take these two qualities, Vatsalya and Karunya. How do you interpret? Vatsalya, we say affectionate, and Karunya, we simply say compassionate. That's all. If you translate and say simply like that. But how these two sects interpret this? See, Vatsalya is defined. One sect defines it as dosha bhogyatva, that the Supreme Lord relishes even the defects. That's one interpretation. The second interpretation is that he is unmindful of those differences or defects, he accepts the devotee. This is the difference. The illustrative example cited to highlight this point is, when a cow delivers a calf, there are impurities on its body. The mother cow licks the calf. Now, this is the concept accepted by all. One sect says that the impurities on the body of the calf is relishable to the mother cow and it licks. The other sect says, irrespective of the fact, the defects in the body of the calf, unmindful of the motherly affection, the mother cow licks. This is the interpretation. But both the sects admit that Vatsalya is affection. The Tengalai sects, they says that the dosha bhogyatva, the Lord relishes the defects in the devotee. This is one interpretation. While the Vadagalai sects says, no, it cannot be. Defect is always a defect. There is no doubt about that. But because of the devotion of the devotee to the Lord overlooks the defects and accepts him. This is the difference. Similarly, you take Karunyam or compassion. How do you interpret this? It is there. Karunya, compassion, Daya we say. Swami Vedanta Deshika has written a beautiful poem, Daya Shatakam, on this. And how do you interpret this? The one sect says, Paradukka Dukkitvam. On seeing the sorrow of one person, you too feel very sad and dejected. The other sect interprets that Dosha Nirakarana Icha, a desire to remove the affliction of the other person. These are the two interpretations for Karunya. See, the Tengalai sect says, this is the quality of a Vaishnava, Sri Vaishnava. So if you see the suffering of others, you too feel suffered, you feel dejected, and you are also in the state of sorrow. But how to remove his affliction or pain? So you have a desire and find out the ways and means to remove the karunya, the pain of the other person. This is Vedanta Deshika's interpretation. Paradukka Nirakarana Icha, to remove the desire to remove the affliction of the other person. And if you also feel sorrow with him, who will remove his sorrow? So this is the kind of interpretation with regard to each and every concept. This is how the differences came out between the two sects. What is called the Ashtadasha Veda. As he said, all these differences can be reconciled and minimized. It's only the interpretation. That's why Sri Deshika says emphatically, Sri Bhashyakararudeya Shishya Sampradayangalile Yojana. Yojana is interpretation. Yojana Bedame Andri Artha Virodamille. There is no difference of opinion with regard to the concept, but only the interpretation. This is how the system goes on. The differences with regard to the mark is very late. As he said, the Thiruman, whether it is Y or U, both are wrong. I would say that. How to wear this Thiruman? If you have to go to the text, the pramanas, and if you go into that, it definitely says how to wear this turban. And if you wear accordingly, as per the injunctions, it will neither look you or Y. So if you see it as Y, it will appear to you a Y. And if you see it as you, it will be as you. That's all. So, very unfortunately, the present day generation has not gone into the details, or nobody taught them, because we do not know why they have not been taught all these things. We have to see the tradition, and all these differences became more and more rigid as time went on, and particularly after independence, when all these judiciary came into existence. The judges are perplexed. Even Sri Vaishnavas themselves are not clear with regard to their concepts. And all of a sudden, if you present it in the court of law, what the judge will do? He doesn't know. Every judge wants to avoid such cases. This is the reality. One of the judges, Sami, enak onnume puriyala Sami. The fact is this. The need of the hour is that, apart from these 11 injunctions, somebody should take the initiative to educate the next generation. This is the main agenda on hand. Unless otherwise this task is ventured, the differences will become more and more wider than what it is now. And even at the time of Sri Deshika, the differences were there, but he tried to reconcile them. If one has a thorough study of all the texts of Sri Vedanta Deshika, nowhere in his text he would say that the other sect is wrong. He will never reject that. He accepts that. But he would say, according to them, this is the view. He will simply mention that and leave it at that. And then he will proceed to give his own interpretation and leave the judgment to the reader. Nowhere he would say that this is wrong. But very unfortunately, the present day generation says he is wrong. You ask him why he is wrong, nobody will be able to say this. If anybody go to these sects when they are fighting with each other, why do you fight? For no reason, they will not give a satisfactory answer. At the heat of the moment, particularly in Kanchipuram, you say, there will be physical fight within the temple itself. And after the fight is over, both of them will be joining together and will be discussing, elbowing. Why? But shortly to say, nobody knows why they fight for, what is the reason for their fight. It is the ego. Just, I was telling to Gopal Swami, Bhanabhatta, he belongs to 6th or 7th century. He is a poet, great poet, Sanskrit prose writer. He says in one of his books, Ahankara pradhanohi viprajanaha. The word vipra means a Brahmin. What should not be there for a Brahmin, he states, Ahankara pradhanaha. Brahmins are generally puffed up with ego. Okay, if it has been a general statement, it applies to all Brahmins. But the next sentence is much more dangerous. He says, Visishtadvaita Darsana. He says specifically, the Vaishnavites are more than the Brahmins. But my teacher used to say, I do not know which Vaishnava offended him. He recorded it in the book. The reality. But in Sri Vaishnava tradition, mutually we say, Adiyen Dasan. The Dasa Bhava should be there. Sri Deshika, in his Srimad Rahasya Tresara, makes one beautiful statement. Bhagavata Sheshatva Adhyavasaya Rasikaha. One should revel being a subordinate to another Vaishnava. Bhagavata Sheshatva. Bhagavata Sheshatva means to be a subordinate to another Bhagavata or a Sri Vaishnava, and there should be Adhyavasaya. Adhyavasaya is absolute conviction. So you get convinced in that aspect and you are able to relish on that aspect, Rasikaha. But nobody seems to possess that. Everybody reads Srimad Rahasya Saram at the time of reading, right. And when they go to the temple, they are puffed up with ego and anger. What is preached or studied is not put into practice. This is the reality. Well, there are so many instances that could be cited here, but I am not going into the details. And Sri Sudarshan has really ventured and tried to present all the facts as facts. There is no digression. That should be the greatest appreciation in that. There is no digression. He had presented facts as facts. And he had given 11 points. And even Deshika has stated this. There are 5 points, not even 11, 5. The first and foremost is that Shri Bhashyate Vasipit Pravartipittal. If you are going to be a true Sri Vaishnava, try to read the Sri Bhashya. And if you are unable to read so, then what is the next step? Go to the hymns of Azhwars. If you are unable to read that, there are so many. Or if you don't do that, there are 5 steps, step by step. Or the last one, if you are unable to do all the 4, at least dwell along with a true another Sri Vaishnava. This is the need of the hour, I believe. We have to move with the true Vaishnava and learn what really Sri Vaishnavism means and try to pass on to the next generation. If you are not going to do that, I don't think Sri Vaishnavism will prosper on that. And Sri Gopal Swami really put it, the very mission of all the religious institutions, Sri Vaishnava religious institution is only to propagate what Ramanuja has taught. That's why we recite Ramanujacharya Divyajna Vardhatam Abhivardhatam. What is the Ramanuja Divyajna and how it can be Vardhanam, how it grows, unless otherwise be taught. And I think Sri Sudarshan's book is an eye-opener in this direction. And I really congratulate him for his effort, and I hope this message will be taken forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Padmanabhacharya. That was insightful and perceptive. In fact, we are fortunate that all the 3 talks today were strong in content and excellent in presentation. I thank Mr. Sudarshan for one more masterly presentation on Vaishnavism and for an illuminating lecture. He finished writing this book in just 10 months. I thank Mr. Gopalaswamy for releasing the book and for his wise, well-informed comments. And Dr. Padmanabhan for gracing this occasion, for blessing the book, and for giving us a thought-provoking talk. And I would like to thank the audience and wish you a very good night.